It's really a wide-ranging look at this question and different beliefs that people have and a search for evidence.
This isn't good. This was dry when we came through here on the way in.
We should get out. How much time do we have?
None. We got to get out of here right now.
All right, we gotta go, guys. Come on, everybody.
One of these men once got swept away by a raging, flooded Amazon River and nearly didn't make it back alive. Another spends his career pulling the remains of fallen soldiers out of jungles and ocean floors most people will never see. A third vanished from the show entirely, and fans still argue about the reason why. Here are 10 real stories behind Expedition Unknown that go a lot deeper than the mysteries the show usually solves. Josh Gates, the man behind Expedition Unknown, built his entire career on chasing danger across dozens of countries, but in 2014, the danger nearly ended him for good. While filming an episode deep in the Peruvian Amazon, Gates and his crew were traveling by boat along a swollen stretch of river when the vessel suddenly capsized without warning in the middle of the current. He was pulled under and swept away by a current strong enough to overpower a grown man in seconds. He disappeared from view long enough that the crew on shore genuinely feared the worst had happened. He was eventually pulled from the water by a local guide who happened to be close enough downstream to reach him before the river carried him any further. Gates was rushed to a hospital in Lima, where doctors treated him for a broken collarbone, a concussion, and a body covered in cuts and bruises from being dragged across rock and debris in the current. He was released after a few days, and, true to the persona that built his career, was back on another expedition within months. The incident changed how the show operated behind the scenes going forward. He treated the recovery period as little more than a scheduling delay, rather than a reason to slow down or reconsider the kind of work he does for a living. Production tightened its boat safety protocols and expanded crew training specifically to prevent a repeat of what happened on that river. These changes reportedly stayed in place through every season since, from mandatory life vest checks to revised routes around known flood zones in remote filming locations. What makes the story stick with longtime fans isn't just how close it came to ending in tragedy. It's how little Gates has ever made of it publicly. He rarely brings it up unprompted, treating it as one difficult day in a career built almost entirely around difficult days. Colleagues who were there describe it differently, as the day everyone on set understood exactly how real the risk behind the show's premise actually was. Gates has since built an entire career on the idea that adventure comes with real stakes, and for one afternoon in Peru, those stakes very nearly caught up with him for good. Stick around, because he isn't the only person connected to this show whose work puts them face to face with death on a regular basis. Colin Colborn. Long before he became a recurring historian on Expedition Unknown, Colin Colborn built his career around a mission most viewers never fully clock while watching the show. He brought home the remains of American service members who never made it back from war. As co-founder of Project Recover, Colborn has spent years combing jungles, ocean floors, and remote crash sites for the wreckage of aircraft and the fallen soldiers who went down with them. This work blends archaeology, marine science, and a level of emotional weight most television historians never have to carry into their day job, coordinating with military families who have waited decades for any real answer about what happened to a father, brother, or son who never came home. His 5 seasons on the show, from 2021 to 2025, brought that same mission to a much wider audience, most memorably during the search for the wreckage of the Clipper Endeavour, a Pan Am plane that vanished off the coast of Puerto Rico decades earlier, with everyone aboard lost to the sea and never recovered by any prior search effort. When the crew finally located it in 2026, after a 30-hour sonar scan of the sea floor, using imaging technology far more advanced than anything available when the plane first went missing, Discovery Channel made a point of confirming there were no plans to recover or disturb the site, describing it as a grave for the people who died in the crash, rather than a salvage opportunity worth pursuing for the sake of a bigger television moment. That single decision says a lot about Colborn's actual role on the show. He is someone whose real job is treating the dead with the respect a dramatic television reveal moment can sometimes forget to include in the excitement of a discovery. Off-camera, Project Recover has helped identify and return home dozens of missing service members to their families, closing chapters that had stayed open for generations. This, Colborn said, matters far more to him than any single episode ever could. Jessica Chobot. For 7 seasons, Jessica Chobot was half of the investigative duo that anchored Expedition X, the paranormal-focused spin-off of Expedition Unknown, trading theories back and forth with biologist Phil Torres as they chased down ghost stories, cryptid sightings, and unexplained phenomena across the country. Chobot brought a media career that predated the show by over a decade, having built her name hosting web shows for IGN, judging robots on ABC's BattleBots, appearing as a contestant on American Ninja Warrior, and co-hosting pop culture programming for Nerdist, all before she ever set foot on an Expedition X set in 2020. Then, after Season 7, she was simply gone. Heather Amaro stepped into the co-host role starting in Season 8, and Chobot's departure was never given much of a public explanation beyond the standard. Handoff networks tend to prefer over-dramatic farewells that might overshadow the new arrival. Fans noticed immediately, flooding forums and comment sections asking what had actually happened. And speculation ranged from a scheduling conflict with her other media work to a simple mutual decision that her chapter on the show had run its course after 7 solid seasons of investigating strange claims together. Some pointed to her continued podcast and comic writing commitments as the likely explanation, while others speculated about behind-the-scenes changes at the network level following Discovery's broader restructuring of its unscripted lineup around that same period. Whatever the real reason, Chobot has continued building the same kind of varied media career she had before Expedition X, writing comics, hosting podcasts, and appearing across platforms far removed from paranormal investigation, treating her time chasing ghosts as one interesting chapter among many rather than the single defining role of her career. Richard Bates. If Josh Gates is the face of Expedition Unknown, Richard Bates is one of the people who actually makes the science behind the mysteries hold up. A geophysicist at the University of St. Andrews, Bates has appeared across many seasons of the show since 2017, brought in whenever an episode needs real subsurface imaging, ground-penetrating radar, or sonar work capable of finding what's actually buried beneath centuries of dirt and silt before anyone starts digging with a shovel. His work sits at the unglamorous end of the production. It involves hours of slow, methodical scanning across muddy fields or shallow coastlines that rarely make the highlight reel but decide whether the dramatic reveal at the end of an episode actually has something real underneath it or nothing at all. Bates has spent his academic career studying coastal geophysics and underwater archaeology long before television ever called. He published research on submerged landscapes and ancient shoreline changes that has nothing to do with monster hunting or lost treasure. And he's continued that work in parallel with his TV appearances rather than letting one replace the other. Colleagues describe him as the person who keeps the show honest, the one willing to tell Gates on camera that the data doesn't support a theory, even when a more dramatic answer would make for better television and a more satisfying episode ending. That tension between what audiences want to hear and what the instruments actually show has become one of the more respected threads running through the show's science-driven episodes. And Bates has stayed involved precisely because production has continued to let him call it the way the readings actually say it, rather than pushing him toward a more sensational conclusion that ratings might favor, but the actual data simply doesn't support. Keep watching, because the people working just off camera on this show have stories just as dangerous as anything filmed for the episode itself. Phil Torres. The scientific backbone of Expedition X since it premiered in 2020, Phil Torres brought a resume most television hosts could never match. He is a Cornell University graduate in entomology and biology who spent over 4 years living and working in the Amazon rainforest, discovering more than 40 new species along the way, many of which made it into global science coverage well before he ever stepped in front of a camera. Born and raised in Denver, Torres also spent 2 years hosting Techno, a weekly science and technology program on Al Jazeera America, building a reputation as a scientist comfortable explaining complex fieldwork to a general audience long before Discovery approached him about a new paranormal-focused series. On the show, Torres plays the skeptic to the paranormal claims Chobot, and later Heather Amaro chased down, applying real fieldwork and ecological expertise to explain away sightings that usually turn out to have a far less mysterious cause than the legend originally suggests, whether that means an unusual insect, a misidentified animal call, or a natural phenomenon nobody on scene had considered before his arrival. His academic background carries real weight behind those explanations, having conducted extensive fieldwork in zoology and ecology across more than 30 countries, and appeared as a scientific authority for outlets, including the Wall Street Journal and MSNBC, long before television ever came calling with an offer to host a show of his own. That real-world expertise has never fully left him, even mid-season. In early 2025, Torres briefly stepped away from filming following the birth of his second daughter, taking paternity leave that pushed his return until partway through the following season's premiere. It's a detail easy to miss for casual viewers, but it says something about how the show actually operates behind the polished editing. A working scientist balancing a demanding filming schedule with 2 young kids at home and a 3rd child now on the way. The same juggling act plenty of parents recognize regardless of whether cameras are involved. Torres returned to the field by mid-January 2026, back to tracking cryptid sightings and unexplained phenomena across the country, carrying the same grounded, evidence-first approach that made him the show's most trusted voice from the very beginning of the spin-off's run. Ryder. Before Josh Gates ever launched Expedition Unknown, he cut his teeth on Destination Truth, the sci-fi series that first sent him chasing monsters and legends around the world, starting in 2007. Ryder was there from close to the beginning, working her way up from field researcher to field producer over 5 seasons. She was the person keeping the whole operation functional, while Gates provided the on-camera chaos audiences tuned in for week after week. Longtime fans of the original show still cite her as one of its most memorable presences. Sharp, unflappable, and somehow always the one talking Gates out of his worst ideas before they turned into an actual problem out in the field, wherever in the world that field happened to be that week. When Destination Truth ended in 2012, Ryder didn't fade from the industry the way plenty of reality show alumni do once their series wraps and the offers stop coming. She co-founded Pax Pictures, a female-led production company built around telling stories she actually wanted to tell rather than whatever a network handed her next, and went on to executive produce projects including a women's international football docuseries that highlighted refugee athletes and their path back into the sport through programs supported by the Danish Refugee Council, working directly with players like Nadia Nadam on stories far removed from monster hunting in Southeast Asian jungles. She also appeared alongside other paranormal investigators on National Geographic's Chasing UFOs, keeping one foot in the genre that first made her name even as her production career expanded well beyond it into entirely different kinds of storytelling. From chasing cryptids through Southeast Asian jungles to building a company centered on stories she chose herself, Ryder's path after the show has taken her about as far from her original job description as a career in unscripted television realistically allows. Jael DePardo. Not every face from the early Destination Truth years got the same lasting spotlight, and Jael DePardo's run on the show is a good example of how some cast changes happened during those early seasons. Listed among the program's former team members alongside Ali Zubik, Gabe Copeland, and Araceli Haldeman, DePardo was part of the rotating roster of researchers who joined Gates on location during the show's early sci-fi years. Back when the format was still figuring out exactly which combination of personalities worked best on camera before settling into something more consistent for later seasons. That kind of turnover was common in a genre still finding its footing, long before reality adventure shows had settled into the more stable, long-running formats audiences expect today. Unlike Aaron Ryder, whose name became inseparable from the show's identity, DePardo and the other early departures largely returned to lives outside the spotlight once their seasons wrapped, choosing not to build the kind of public-facing media career that kept Ryder, and later Gates himself, in front of cameras for decades afterward. There's no dramatic story behind most of these early exits, just the natural churn of a young show still figuring out its own identity, testing different personalities and dynamics before the network and producers settled on what actually worked for a growing audience over the seasons that followed. It's easy to forget, watching the polished 16-season version of Expedition Unknown airing today, that the show spent its first years constantly experimenting with its own cast, adding and losing team members season by season until it finally landed on the format that made it a lasting hit. Keep watching, because the people working the cameras rather have their own stories worth knowing too. Brian C. Weed. Every dramatic reveal on Expedition Unknown lives or dies on how it's actually filmed. And for years, that job belonged largely to director of photography, Brian C. Weed, a name that rarely appears in reviews or fan discussions despite being central to the show's entire visual language. Credited in over 13 episodes between 2017 and 2026, Weed's camera work is the reason the show's remote locations, sunken wrecks, and buried tombs feel as immersive as they do, capturing footage in conditions that range from cramped underwater caves to dust storms in the middle of open desert, all while keeping the frame steady enough for the final edit to actually use without hours of stabilization work back at the studio afterward. Cinematography credits rarely get the same recognition as the on-camera talent, and Weed's name is one most casual viewers have never registered, despite how much of the show's visual identity runs through his lens on any given episode. The physical demands of the job are easy to underestimate from a couch at home, hauling camera equipment through jungle terrain, diving with gear built to survive salt water and pressure, and doing it all while staying close enough to Gates to capture the moment a discovery actually happens, rather than the moment right after it, a split-second timing window that leaves almost no room for error on location. It's the kind of work that shapes an entire show's tone without ever putting a name to a face audiences recognize, and Weed's run behind the camera bridged many of the show's most memorable seasons, from its early Travel Channel years through its move to Discovery. Evan B. Stone. Working alongside Weed for much of the same stretch, Evan B. Stone served as another of the show's directors of photography, credited across 12 episodes between 2015 and 2024, spanning the show's move from Travel Channel to Discovery, and the expansion into new formats like Expedition Files, a run that put him behind the camera for some of the franchise's biggest audience milestones. Stone's tenure covered some of the program's most technically demanding shoots: expeditions requiring specialized underwater rigs, low-light cave systems, and locations remote enough that getting equipment on site took as much planning as the actual investigation once the crew finally arrived on location, sometimes after days of travel just to reach a single filming spot. Behind the scenes, crew members like Stone rarely get profiled the way hosts and on-camera experts do, yet their decisions, what to frame, when to hold a shot, how to capture a moment of genuine surprise rather than a staged one, shape how audiences experience the entire show far more than most viewers realize while watching an episode unfold. Stone's work sits alongside Weeds as part of the reason Expedition Unknown has maintained a consistent visual identity across 16 seasons and multiple spin-offs, even as hosts, co-hosts, and on-screen experts have rotated in and out over the show's decade-long run. The two of them formed a kind of visual through line connecting seasons that otherwise had almost nothing else in common. The known expedition. What connects these 10 members isn't loss, it's risk, reinvention, and the kind of career turns that never make it into a highlight reel or a dramatic season finale. Everyone has built careers around danger, departure, or discovery without ever needing a tragic ending attached to make their story worth telling. Colborn's entire professional life revolves around death, in a sense, recovering service members who never made it home after decades of families waiting for closure. Yet he remains very much alive and still doing that work today across new locations every season. Chobot and DePardo both walked away from the franchise on their own terms. Their careers continue in entirely different directions rather than ending. Weed and Stone, the two men who spent years capturing everything audiences actually saw on screen across 16 seasons of footage, remain working professionals whose names most viewers still couldn't pick out of a lineup despite years of steady, unglamorous contributions behind the lens. Sometimes, the most interesting thing about a show built on chasing mysteries is how ordinary and how genuinely alive the people behind it actually turn out to be once the cameras stop rolling and the credits finish scrolling by. The real danger in this story belongs to one man, on one river, on one afternoon in 2014. And even he walked away to keep telling stories for another decade and counting, still hosting new seasons well into 2026, with no signs of slowing down. The rest tells a story about longevity, people who found their way into a strange corner of television and, instead of burning out or vanishing, built entire careers around the same curiosity that got them there in the first place. Which of these stories surprised you the most? Is there someone else connected to Expedition Unknown whose story we missed? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Now click on the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.